The morning my husband told me to smile and shake her hand, I knew exactly what kind of woman he thought I was. It was a Tuesday in early November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and he'd called me into his office like I was a vendor who'd shown up late. He sat behind his desk, the same desk we picked out together at a furniture store in Scottsdale 7 years ago, back when we were just starting the firm and everything felt like it was ours. And he folded his hands the way he does when he's about to say something he's already decided. "Cassandra is joining the team officially," he said, "as Director of Business Development. I need you to make her feel welcome." My husband, Darren, was the founder and managing partner of Whitmore Group, a mid-size commercial architecture firm based in Phoenix. I was the head of design. Had been since year one, since before we had a receptionist, since I was drawing floor plans on a drafting table in our second bedroom while he made cold calls in the kitchen. I built the portfolio that won our first government contracts. I'd led the team that got us the Arizona Business Journal Award 2 years running. Cassandra had been consulting for us for 4 months. I knew what she was before I had proof. You don't spend 11 years married to someone without learning the texture of a lie. The way he'd started taking calls in the garage, the new gym schedule that somehow never produced any different results. The Christmas party last year where she'd laughed a little too long at something he said, and he'd looked at me right after, just for a second, the way people look when they're checking if they've been caught. I didn't say anything yet. I smiled at him and said, "Of course, I'll introduce her around." That was a Thursday. By Sunday, my sister had sent me a screenshot from Cassandra's Instagram, a corner booth at Lawns at the Hermosa, which is a very nice restaurant in Paradise Valley, and my husband's hand visible on the table next to hers, his wedding ring off, his watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary very much on. I sat with that screenshot for a long time. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I'd expected to cry. Instead, I felt something cold and precise settle into my chest, the way a room feels when you finally turned off a noise you'd stopped noticing was there. I called my attorney that same evening. She's been my attorney since I incorporated my freelance practice before I even met Darren, and I told her everything. She told me to document, to be patient, and to not move money or change behavior in any way that could be used against me in discovery. "Don't tip him off," she said, "and don't sign anything." I didn't. The following Monday, Cassandra showed up to our weekly design review meeting. She had no design background. Her title said business development, but she was inserting herself into creative decisions with the kind of confidence that only works if you believe no one will push back. She suggested we refresh the brand language on the Morrison Community Center project, a public school renovation that I'd been managing for 8 months, that had community stakeholders, that had gone through 3 rounds of city approvals. I corrected her, politely, with facts. She smiled at me the way people smile when they think politeness is weakness. After the meeting, Darren pulled me aside and said I'd been dismissive. I said, "I'll work on my tone." He didn't hear the flatness in it. He never did. Darren's father-in-law, my father-in-law, a man named Theodore who was the original founder of a smaller precursor firm before Darren bought him out, called me that week. He'd heard from someone on the board, apparently. He didn't say much. He just said, "I know what's happening, and I want you to know I'm paying attention." Then he asked about the Morrison project, because he was the one who'd introduced us to the school district contact, and he cared about the work in a way his son had gradually stopped doing. Theodore was 73 and had a bad hip and was very direct in the way that people get when they've decided they're too old to be tactful. I'd always liked him better than I'd admitted. The weeks that followed were a particular kind of misery that's hard to describe. The misery of continuing to function normally inside a structure that's already broken. I went to work. I ran my team. I attended meetings where Cassandra sat 2 seats from me, and sometimes touched Darren's arm when she was making a point, so briefly that someone who didn't know would miss it. I came home to the house we'd renovated together, the kitchen with the soapstone counters I'd spent 3 weeks choosing, and I cooked dinner sometimes, and I went to bed on my side, and he went to bed on his. I was also doing other things. I was documenting time-stamped emails, meeting notes, screenshots of approvals I'd secured and projects I'd originated, and clients who'd come to the farm specifically because of my work. I was not paranoid. I was precise. My attorney had told me that in Arizona, the question in a business dissolution tied to divorce would be contribution, and I had a very clear story to tell about mine. I was also looking at what Cassandra had actually done during her 4 months as a consultant. I had access to the project management system. I had access to the billing records. And what I found, when I looked carefully, was a pattern of expenses. Client entertainment, market research, a 2-night stay at a Sedona resort in September that was billed to the Morrison account as a site review that did not correspond to any actual deliverables. I printed everything. I kept it in a folder in my car. In early December, Darren told me he wanted to move Cassandra into my office and relocate me to the conference room while we figure out the space situation. We'd hired 2 new junior architects and the office was legitimately crowded. But my office was the corner office. I'd been in it for 6 years. It had a window that faced the mountain preserve, and I'd kept a small cactus on the sill since the day we moved in. I said, "Let me think about it." He looked surprised. He'd expected me to accommodate. That weekend, Theodore came over for dinner, just the 3 of us, which was increasingly uncomfortable, and I think Darren was already planning to find a reason to phase out these dinners, but he hadn't yet. After Darren went to take a call in the garage, Theodore looked at me across the table and said, "How are you really doing?" I told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I built that firm for 30 years before I handed it to him. I still have my name on the original founding documents. I still have relationships with half the city contacts that matter." He set down his fork. I'm not going to watch him run it into the ground. I didn't ask him what he meant. I thought I understood. The company holiday party was the 2nd Friday in December at a rented venue in Scottsdale. Open bar, catered, about 60 people including clients and partners. I wore a navy dress I'd had for 2 years and did my hair, and I stood at the door with Darren for the first 40 minutes, greeting people because that was my role. Had always been my role, because half the clients in the room were people I'd cultivated. Cassandra arrived in red. Of course she did. She went directly to Darren's side with the ease of someone who'd stopped pretending, and I watched several of our employees make the calculation in real time, deciding what to do with what they were seeing. Some of them looked at me. I smiled. I held my drink, and I circulated, and I talked to the Morrison District contact about the spring reveal, and to our structural engineering partner about a new mixed-use project. And I was good at it. I had always been good at it. And I felt the entire time like I was standing slightly outside my own body, watching myself perform. At some point in the evening, Darren found me near the bar. He'd had 2 drinks and his judgment was loosened. "I need you to be gracious tonight," he said. Low, close, like it was a reasonable thing to say. I looked at him. "Am I not being gracious?" "You know what I mean." "I really don't," I said. "Explain it to me." He didn't. He walked away, back to her, and I stood there for a moment. And then I did the thing I had decided to do 3 days earlier. I found our office manager, who I trusted, and I asked her to make sure the IT contractor we brought in that week had finished the audit I'd requested. She confirmed he had. I thanked her and went back to the party. The IT audit had been my idea. I'd framed it to Darren as a general security review. We'd had a client data concern in October. Legitimate enough that no one questioned it. What it had actually produced was a full log of system access and expense authorizations going back 18 months, including the Sedona resort, including 4 other personal expenses billed to client accounts, including the fact that Cassandra had been given authorization codes that should have required my sign-off and hadn't gotten it. Because someone had quietly restructured her access permissions in August. 3 days after the holiday party, I sent a packet to our outside accountant, our liability insurance carrier, and, because Theodore had asked me to Theodore directly. I sent it from my personal email with my attorney CC'd. Then I went into Darren's office and I told him I was filing for divorce. He stared at me for a long time. "You're serious," he said. "I am. This is because of Cassandra." "This is because of a lot of things," I said. "Cassandra is one of them. The other things are in the packet that went to the accountant this morning." The color left his face the way it leaves a room when someone turns off a lamp. "What packet?" he said. I told him. Not all of it. My attorney had advised me on exactly how much to disclose in this conversation, but enough. The expenses, the access permissions, the 18 months of documentation. "You've been building a case," he said. "I've been protecting myself," I said, which is something I should have done earlier. He said a number of things after that, some of them angry and some of them almost pleading, and I stood in the doorway of his office. My cactus was already in my car. I'd taken it out the day before, and I let him finish. Then I said, "My attorney will be in touch with yours by end of week." And I left. The next 8 months were not easy. Divorce is never easy, and ours was particularly complicated because the business was woven through everything. Our income, our shared history, the question of what I'd contributed, and how it would be valued. Darren's attorney made arguments that my role had been supportive rather than foundational. My attorney made a different argument, supported by 11 years of documentation, client correspondence, award records, and the testimony of 6 current and former clients who confirmed their relationship to the firm had been built through me. Theodore retained his own counsel. He had standing on some of the founding agreements that predated Darren's full acquisition, and he made clear he intended to use it. He wasn't vindictive. He told me plainly he didn't enjoy any of it, but he was thorough, and he remembered everything, and Darren had made the mistake of assuming his father was finished. What the audit revealed fully cost Cassandra her position before the divorce was even finalized. The board, we had a small advisory board, mostly Theodore's legacy contacts, reviewed the findings, and Darren did not have the standing to protect her once it was in front of them. She resigned in February. She and Darren lasted another 6 weeks after that, which I found out through my sister and felt almost nothing about. In June, the Morrison Community Center project was completed. We'd done the reveal. I'd attended as the project lead, because the district contract was technically still under review during the legal proceedings, and my attorney had advised me it was appropriate to see it through. The gymnasium had these big south-facing clear-story windows that flooded the whole space with light in the afternoon, which had been my design decision, which the principal cried about in the best possible way. The district superintendent shook my hand and said, "Whatever happens with the firm, I want you to know we'll follow you." I thanked her. I meant it. The divorce settlement was finalized in September. I received a 40% equity stake in the firm, which was restructured with Theodore as a reinstated co-principal. I also received the right of first negotiation if Darren ever chose to sell his share, which my attorney had fought hard for, and I had understood the value of before she explained it to me. Darren retained his title. He retained the corner office, which I had vacated. He retained the daily operations. I opened my own practice the following month. 7 weeks later, the Morrison district hired me directly for 2 new school renovation projects. The structural engineering firm we partnered with for years called me before I'd even finished setting up the LLC. They wanted to discuss a collaboration. 2 of my former junior architects asked if they could come with me, and I said yes. My father-in-law came to the small gathering I held to mark the office opening. It was at my new space, a converted bungalow near downtown Tempe, that I'd renovated myself with 1 contractor and a lot of weekends. He brought a potted saguaro, which was the most Theodore thing I could imagine, and he set it on my windowsill without a word, and I didn't say anything for a moment. because I was busy not crying. "You built the better half of that firm," he said. "Now you get to build something that's entirely yours." I thought about what that meant for a long time after he left. The entire structure of my professional life for 11 years had been shared. The credit, the decisions, the failures, everything. I'd made peace with shared because I'd believed in what we were building together. The loss wasn't just the marriage. It was the version of myself who had trusted that partnership completely. But here's what I've come to understand about starting over when you're in your 40s with your name on nothing and everything at once. It is terrifying, and it is clarifying in a way that nothing else is. You find out exactly what you're capable of when there's no structure to lean on that someone else built. Darren called me once, about 3 months after the settlement, to tell me that a client we'd shared had specifically asked for me and he'd had to refer them out. He said it without obvious feeling, just as information, and I could tell he wanted me to respond in some particular way that I couldn't quite identify. I told him I hoped the firm continued to do well. I meant it, mostly. Theodore was involved again, which meant the work would be taken seriously. Then I went back to the floor plan I was drawing, a library renovation for a school district in Mesa, a project that was entirely mine, that I would see through from concept to ribbon cutting, that would have my firm's name on the dedication plaque. And I kept working until the sun came down past the mountain preserve I could still see from my window, the one I'd chosen because it reminded me of the old office. And I thought about how funny it is that the things you fight for and the things you find on the other side are never quite the same shape. But sometimes the new shape fits you better than the old one ever did. I used to think that staying quiet was the same as losing. I spent a long time believing that if I didn't fight out loud, if I didn't confront Darren in the hallway, didn't expose Cassandra at the holiday party, didn't make a scene the way the situation seemed to deserve, then I was letting something be taken from me without resistance. It took me until the other side of all of it to understand that the quietest move I made was also the most devastating one. Not because I planned it to be devastating, but because I'd spent 11 years doing the actual work. And the work doesn't lie. What I know now is that the outcomes in our lives are rarely random. Darren didn't lose the firm's best client relationships because of bad luck. He lost them because he'd stopped earning them and assumed they'd stay anyway. Cassandra didn't get removed from her position because someone decided to punish her. She got removed because the documentation existed, because the numbers were there, because you cannot permanently hide what you are when there's a paper trail. I didn't win anything. The truth just eventually ran out of places to hide. There's something I want to say about integrity, because I think it gets talked about like it's a soft quality, a nice to have. It's not. Integrity is structural. It holds weight. Every decision I made during those months, to document rather than confront, to protect my work rather than perform my anger, to see the Morrison project through even when everything personal was falling apart. Those decisions compounded. They built something. And when the legal process asked what I had contributed, I had an actual answer, backed by 11 years of evidence that I hadn't manufactured in crisis, but had simply lived. The intelligence part of it, and I don't mean intelligence in the abstract, I mean the practical, deliberate kind, was knowing what I actually had before I needed to use it. It was understanding that in a business dispute tied to a divorce, contribution is everything. It was asking my attorney the right questions early enough to matter. It was reading the expense records carefully enough to see the pattern that was right there waiting. Nobody handed me that. I had to be willing to look. But the part that cost me the most, and that I'm most proud of, was just continuing. Getting up and going to work every day inside a situation that was humiliating and painful and unresolved. Finishing the Morrison project. Sitting in meetings, smiling at the holiday party while holding a drink and a secret and 11 years of grief. That kind of endurance doesn't feel heroic when you're in it. It feels like survival, but I think it's the thing. More than any clever legal strategy, more than any satisfying confrontation, that made everything else possible. You cannot build something new if you've burned yourself out performing your pain. Theodore put a saguaro on my windowsill at the opening and didn't make a speech about it. I think about that a lot. Some people understand that showing up quietly is its own kind of statement. I built my practice one project at a time, the same way I built everything else. And the work, as always, told the truth.